Croeso cynnes I chi i'r sesiwn holi hwn. Diolch yn fawr I chi am ddod, gobeithio fydd e o ddiddordeb I chi. Welcome everyone to the Senedd Science Hustings. Very difficult to say. It's a chance to hear from the four main parties about their plans for supporting science in Wales, and indeed to discover how much of a priority they think that it is. How safe will research, development and innovation be in their hands? And the four people in the spotlight hoping to be elected to the Senedd are, dyma ein hymgeiswyr ni, David Rees, Welsh Labour candidate for Aberafon, there with a nice backdrop of Talbot behind him. Granville Ham, Plaid Cymru, candidate for Brecon and Radnor. We have David Wilkins, Welsh Liberal Democrat candidate for Clwyd West, and somebody who has stepped in the last minute. In fact, only known for an hour and a half, we have Tom Parkhill from the Conservative Party, candidate for Rhondda. Thank you, Tom. Please pass on our best wishes to Griffith Parry. I hope he has a speedy recovery. Croeso cynnes I chi gyd. A warm welcome to the four of you. Now then, this event has been organised by the Learned Society of Wales, the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Royal Society of Biology, and the Institute of Physics. And I am really honoured to be hosting. It's my first hustings. My name is Elin Rhys, and I'm a lapsed biochemist, was briefly a scientist in the water industry, and then I became a broadcaster. And then 28 years ago, I founded a media company. It's called Telescope, and it's based in Swansea. And we make all sorts of programs, but I try personally to concentrate on as many science documentaries as I can. And thankfully, we are still there. But I accepted this particular gig because I believe that Wales can and should be supported to excel in science, research, development and innovation. There's no doubt that innovation is the bedrock to delivering jobs and growth for the Welsh economy. And whilst we have the reputation, don't we, for being the land of song, where poets are and rugby players, we should also be given credit for the massive contribution that Welsh scientists have made to everyday life globally in the past. The likes of William Grove, Edward Taffy Bowen, David Hughes, Alfred Russel Wallace, William Morgan, Tech Roberts, John Horton, John Merrick Thomas, Evan Williams, Barbara Middlehurst, Mary Wynne Warner, Margaret Tisdale, Gwendolyn Rees and Frances Hogan. We have the potential to carry on this tradition with the talent we have in Wales today and make a difference globally and to the Welsh economy. So let's see how important the four parties think that it is. We've already received quite a few questions, which I'm going to try and work through, and we're also taking questions right now. So please could you put them in the Q&A box that you'll see on the bottom of your screen, and the team will pick them up. And you can do this thing called upvote your questions so that some of them can rise to the top. I apologise in advance if I miss some questions, and also bear in mind that I may well have to combine some questions because some of them might be similar. Each candidate will get the chance to respond to each question. So any overlong answers, gentlemen, I hope you'll forgive me, but you will be cut off kindly, I hope. But I will start with giving each candidate a minute to introduce themselves and to give their opening pitch. And I'm going to start, if I may, with David Rees from Welsh Labour, candidate for Aberafon. He is the chair of the cross-party group on STEM. And yet the Labour manifesto apparently published today does not mention science once, David. But do let us know all about you and what your pitch is.
Thank you, Ellen. Well, obviously, as you mentioned, I'm David Rees. I'm the Labour candidate for Aberafon. And I've been fortunate to be the member of the Senedd, before that Assembly member for Aberafon for the last 10 years. And for those 10 years, I've actually chaired the cross-party group on STEM at the Assembly and the Senedd. Because I have a passion for science and technology. I was a lecturer in computer science before I became into politics. I also studied civil and structural engineering at university, so my background is totally in that field. because I believe very strongly in ensuring that science plays its part in building our economy. Ellen, you highlighted some of our historic individuals. There's also Chris Evans from Baghdad, who has who's a very great entrepreneur in the science field. So we have been very successful. We've had Sarah Cymru, and we're seeing stars coming through that. There is a huge potential in Wales that still is out there. Now, along the ones we've already found and identified, there's still a huge potential out there, which we want to nurture and bring along. And that is what's important. I think you will find that there may be some references in not necessarily specific to science, but there will definitely be references to digital technology, digital economy, to bringing forward more research and development. They're there, and we will be pushing those agendas because we know the importance science plays to our economy, the importance science plays to our manufacturing, and the importance science plays to research and development. And I know you want me to stop, so let us.
I do, but diolch yn fawr. That was a very encouraging start. Diolch yn fawr. May I move on now then, please, to Grenville Ham of Applied Cymru. How about you? What is your minute stance?
Okay, well, firstly, I'm Grenville. I live in Brecon, and it's one of these sort of things you always have to say to an audience. I'm not a politician. I'm a dad. I've just finished work and given the kids a pizza, and I've brushed upstairs, and hopefully they'll be quiet. Basically, I think overwhelmingly the evidence is telling us the biggest challenge we've got is the ecological and climate crisis. It is imminent. 10 years ago, they were saying if we don't really nail this now, we're doomed, and 10 years on, we haven't really begun to even tackle it. Fundamental to that, and I've spent much of my career, I mean, my early career, I was a high school teacher, but then retrained, and I basically design and build green tech innovations. I won the biggest climate change innovation prize at the time in the UK about a decade ago, and a few other prizes and stuff like that. And I am genuinely convinced that technology is what's going to drag us out of this great big problem. And I think embedding that into the very center of the future Welsh economy is going to be key. Not just to us and solving a lot of the problems that we've got, but equally in playing our part, because we know it's an interconnected world.
So we have a prize winner in our midst. That's really good. Thank you very much. And you're not the only person tonight to warn me that there might be babies crying, so don't worry about it at all. Could I move on to David Wilkins, who I believe is a physics teacher. David, Liberal Democrat, standing for Clwyd West.
Thank you very much, Ellen. So my name's David Wilkins, if you said, and I'm standing for the Liberal Democrats in Clwyd West. I'm also on the list up here in North Wales as well. I'm a physics teacher, and I consider myself a part of the supply chain, supplying the most important commodity perhaps in all of this that we're talking about, which is the young and inquisitive minds that are going to go on and do the things that we're talking about today. As a Liberal Democrat, as well as a teacher, I'm fiercely proud of the new curriculum that we've managed to implement over the last couple of years. And it's one of the reasons, well, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is the focus it puts on STEM and interdisciplinary approaches towards teaching, towards problem solving and developing innovation alongside business, because ultimately we do live in a world that requires products to be sold. And hopefully we can do good innovation and good engineering to produce good products, not ones which are throwaway and contribute towards the climate crisis and the ecological disaster we're heading towards. And one thing I've learned is that collaboration is a really important part of that curriculum. Collaboration is a really important part of the modern world. And I've had the pleasure of standing underground at CERN and seeing the huge amount of international collaboration that is going on into peeling back the universe to find out what it was like. And as a Liberal Democrat, that fits really closely with what I believe, that we need to put collaboration and sensible multinational approaches at the forefront of everything that we do to research the solutions, as well as implement them so that everybody gets the chance to benefit from new technology. And we've got a rich history, sorry.
Yeah, we have. I mentioned the rich history at the beginning. Thank you. Right, your turn, Tom Parkhill, for the Conservative Party.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting me here to just briefly step in for Griff, who couldn't be here this evening. I suppose my background is within the life sciences industry, so I have a molecular biology background and have specifically worked with within the food technology industry, within allied industries to the chemical industry, and now working within the pharmaceutical industry. I have a real passion for science and for being able to get young people into science and into STEM subjects. I think it's one of the most important things to be able to actually be able to grow the economy, to be able to allow young people to be able to get a good paying, well paid job that's going to be able to help them throughout their lives. And also it's going to be a critical way of us being able to green the economy in the future. So I think science technology for me is one of the critical things that we need to do in the Senedd, and to be able to support those jobs and industry to be able to develop more fully, because we've got a strong history of manufacturing, particularly within the engineering sectors within Wales. After many years, you see the likes of GE who have been here for a long time, and I think it's something we really need to grow and to be able to expand on particularly on the research side. Actually, although there's a lot of research going on within academia specifically, it's not necessarily happening as much within the private sector. So what I would like to see is a real encouragement of the private sector within the innovative spaces and the research as well as academia.
Lovely. Well, I think we'd all agree with that. Thank you very much. Right, there, you all warmed up now, and that's good to see. So thank you very much for that. I guess one of the questions that, just to warm you up again, is if the pandemic has taught us anything, right, it is that how dependent we are on science, and possibly more dependent than a lot of people have ever given science credit for. I mean, what were we hearing all the time was follow the science. So now that, you know, we're on our way out, or we're part of the COVID recovery, could you briefly talk, each one of you, about the emphasis you think that science should have in the COVID recovery? And are you frustrated that possibly your colleagues in the parties do not give science as much credence as perhaps you do as individuals? And could I please have Grenville Ham to start this time, please? Doing you all in turn.
Yeah, so a comment on the follow the science. I mean, as a climate activist for many years, it's been deeply frustrating. Maybe it's a paradigm shift, but we do know that it was following the science, but maybe with a 3-week lag. And when you come to things like pandemics, that's deeply troubling. So I think what we really need to do beyond this is actually start going, okay, let's not use optics, political opinion to maybe form immediate policies. Let's actually use data. Let's use those statisticians who are telling us unequivocally this needs acting now. And it goes beyond just pandemics, but equally, I think, you know, fingers crossed we do come out of this. I think we need to have a resilient system in place so that, you know, there may be variants, we may be back at square one. Let's learn from these efforts, but let's also not be in a huge rush to get back to where we were. Because let's remember where we were going into this pandemic, there was a massive poverty amongst our children, precarious job situations, and a looming climate crisis. So let's actually use this as an opportunity to gather more evidence and go, let's actually tweak the system to make it much more equitable and much more beneficial for our future.
Okay, David Wilkins.
Having spoken to an MP involved in some of the work going on in London, she cited one of the biggest problems in the UK's response to COVID was that everybody in a position to make decisions had no idea what the science was. They didn't understand the term exponential growth. They didn't understand what an R number really was. And when you see the national press printing headlines like Boris Johnson battles experts to save Christmas from the Express, when you see that, it shows you that we are at the moment so driven by electing politicians rather than scientists, statisticians, people with an interest in more than simply promoting themselves. That, I think, is really dangerous, and it's really important. It's wonderful to see such a collection of scientific minds here this evening, but unless we're actually elected and different experiences and different voices arrive in the Senedd, we're just going to end up repeating this cycle of failures, because ultimately it's just politicians that get in.
Thank you. Well, David Rees, if I can turn to you about that, because you were the chair of cross-party STEM group in the Senedd. So would you agree that there is a bit of a lack of knowledge and understanding of science, and as a result, people are maybe too afraid to talk about it, or to, you know, to bring it to the fore and to include it in their policies? What would you say?
I don't think there's a lack of understanding of science. I will agree with David, there's a lack of possibly people with a background in science and engineering, in a sense, because I think this is politics per se, whether it's the Assembly, whether it's the Parliament. There seems to be a clear path for many people, which is researcher, and then you come in from a researcher agenda into the politics world. And so we need to have a greater diversity of background, and not to dispute that at all. But there is an understanding of science. But what we have to remember is there's the way it's applied science as much as anything as pure science. We need to ensure that the applied science, how we apply the science, how we build and use it in innovative approaches, how we use technology, how we create the industries through the science and technologies. That is what we need to make sure of the place. So there's two agendas. How do we promote science so that we get young people coming through? But also, how do we use science to ensure that we create the innovation, we create the design and technologies which companies can develop and build upon within Wales? So we have to separate the two agendas. You can't make them say they are different. And I think the government understands both. And to an extent, there will be some who haven't got that understanding of engineering because they are not engineers. There'll be some who haven't got the understanding of physics. David been to CERN, I've been to CERN. The understanding of how the physics works. You know, they haven't got all that, but they do understand what science can do for industry.
Okay, thank you. Tom, how about you? How would you like to see science being promoted within the party in the Senedd, and how that's going to influence COVID recovery and a general understanding of science and appreciation of it?
I think it's critical. I think both Davids, I agree with points both Davids have made about this. I think the thing that frustrates me most is actually the phrase "follow the science," because anyone who's been in top level research or in research knows how grey science can be at certain times. Admittedly, within the pandemic, that may not have been the case at times, but I think it's really difficult as well when governments of all colours have been, I suppose, making decisions which are that they're justifying with the science, but then they're not always backed up with the science. For example, the non-essential retail ban, that there's not really a scientific reason for that. It's a way in which the politics of it have got. I think is more influenced by politics than it is by scientific reasoning. Within my party, I think there's a lot going on within the Conservative Party to actually promote science and STEM, and particularly with regards to the UK Research and Innovation Funds, which is coming in to be able to promote science and particularly scientific research. And there's a whole range of different ways from I suppose technical apprenticeships, so which are university level apprenticeships, which we're trying to promote and come in through the next few years, as well as trying to drive not just the pure research, but also to get that into industry as well.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And I guess that's a great lead to the next question, because I think we really do need to get into the nitty-gritty of funding, because that is what most of the questions are about. So in Wales, we still lag behind the rest of the UK in research and development. And clearly, there are talented teams already in place supporting industry and academic endeavours. However, there is no replacement in sight really for the ERDF and the ESF, and we might just see a complete breakdown of being able to support Wales's economic future. What plans can your parties put in straight away to try and deploy support so that the talent that is already working on these projects doesn't disappear? And I'm going to start with Grenville Ham, if I may. Did I start with you last time, Grenville?
Yeah,
I did, didn't I? Okay, I'm not allowed to
Yeah.
do that. That's breaking the rules. So, David, may I start with you, please? David Wilkins.
Thank you. I think we need a Welsh government which introduces performance-related rewards for securing funding outside of Wales. So let's, essentially put our best researchers, and they are world leading, let's put them essentially on the market, so to speak, and let's go out there and look for people who need technology developing, people who need innovative solutions, and let's invite them in. We need to do something. You're absolutely right. Brexit is a nightmare in terms of what it's going to do to our universities and what it could do for the income of overseas students. So let's look at how we can replace that sensibly by inviting in international collaboration, as I've mentioned before, to help meet that shortfall in funding.
Okay, Tom, there you go. Brexit is a nightmare. So how would you describe the way that we're going to get this funding in place? Something instead of the ERDF and the ESF in place sooner rather than later, because it's running out like in 24 months.
So it's worth stating as well, with regards to the trade agreement, the Horizon funding is going to be continuing. So that's something that is worthwhile mentioning on that front. With regards to the academic funding and the Shared Prosperity Fund, the UK government is committed to matching that funding with the Welsh government and for research projects here. So I don't agree that it's going to be a complete disaster, and there's going to be more opportunities over the coming years for research and development funds to be coming out to I suppose influence the Welsh development and Welsh innovation here.
Okay, let's have David Rees next, please, to talk about that and to talk about the various grants that may be disappearing.
Well, I'm very pleased that Tom's got confidence in the UK government to actually deliver what it promised back on Brexit, because the evidence we have seen, and I mean we have seen that evidence of the Shared Prosperity Fund and the other for this levelling up fund approach is not to the benefit of Wales. Let's be honest about it. We are going to lose as a consequence of both of those funds, and that is they're going to be harmless. I would love to see the UK government live up to its promise of we wouldn't have to be a penny worse off as a consequence of Brexit, but the evidence shown to us so far is not going to deliver that, and I do worry as a consequence of that. Because as you quite rightly pointed out, there was a lot of ERDF funding into projects, and we need to talk about collaboration. And mentioned before, to be able to collaborate with the universities across the world, there needs to be a confidence in the collaborator on the other side that there will be support this side, and that's one of the big concerns we have from the UK government aspect. And the Welsh government is in a sense, can we fund it ourselves, in which case we are paying the price for UK government failing to deliver on the Shared Prosperity Fund? Or do we wait for the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is still unknown? There's a dilemma there as to how we manage to ensure it. But we are looking at research and development. We do know that is a key element of the proposal and the way in which we can move forward. And as we come out of COVID, research and development will be critical in this aspect. So the Welsh government already has put money into research and development. It's put in millions and tens of millions of pounds into R&D, and we will continue to do so. The plan is, no, it's not something which was done 2, 5, 10 years ago. This is something that's been done continually to ensure that we do it. But we are going to be struggling unless the UK government actually honours this commitment to delivering equal funding if we had been in the EU.
But I guess, the art is that whichever one of you goes in or all of you go in, you have to fight for that money. You can't just sit there and expect it to come. There's a fight. Grenville, what is your Plaid Cymru's view on this?
Yeah, well, it will come as no major surprise that we actually want all of these UK-wide grant programs and stuff. We want them devolved to Wales on a population basis, so we get our fair share, and then that we can then decide within Wales to invest those in our environmental, economic, and social priorities. At the moment, it does feel as though we're largely hamstrung. So fundamental to us is having the ability to make that decision ourselves. We've made a commitment in our manifesto that we want R&D research to be about 2% of GDP. I think at the moment we're 1%, and I think a normal, let's say, economy is around about 2.4%. So even if we double it, we're still well short of what advanced economies are doing. But I think fundamentally we do need to have that decision of where it is invested made within Wales.
Okay. There's a lot of funding questions, guys, and this is about QR funding. A couple of people have asked about this. I'll just read this one. For many years, QR funding to Welsh universities has been less compared to our neighbours in England and Scotland, meaning that research in Wales is underfunded compared to our neighbours. Hey. And furthermore, the recent Reid review, which sought to address this inequality, has not been implemented, or it's been largely ignored. Consequently, we lose much of our early career talent and future leaders away from Wales and investment in IPNs crossing the border. What plans do you have to address this with regard to the QR funding, to make sure that that is the core funding for for the quality universities here in Wales? Who shall I start with? This one, Tom, would you like to go first this time, please?
Certainly, and I share the frustrations with regards to the Reid review, because some of it's pretty disappointing really that a lot of the recommendations haven't actually been implemented, which means obviously it's makes Wales less competitive, which is a real shame. And I think we really need to be looking at driving forward the Innovation Engagement Fund recommended by the Reid proposals, and to this would hopefully stand at £7.5 million sorry, that's wrong. £7.5 million for 2021, but 25 million recommended by Reid further. So you can kind of see the disparity of what was recommended and what wasn't, what hasn't been implemented. I think obviously there needs to be a tackling of this particular issue.
Okay, cool. Can I have David Rees's answer to that, please?
Yeah, we all know the QR funding has been hit, and the consequences. We're still talking about £170 million over the year for 2021, 22, I believe. So there still are some number there, but we need to address the Reid report and review. And I know that the Welsh Government put in its Prosperity for All strategy, which really was setting up the whole government approach for competitive and fair economy that helps us increase that part. And this was part of that review, and it's been put into that place. The Welsh Government has been looking at it. Now, I'm not going to here defend, because I've been in STEM long enough, and I've been the chair of the Hospitality Group long enough to identify that are still failings that we need to address. And it is important, though, as we come out of COVID, and that is one of our big problems. COVID the last 12 months, let's be honest about it, has really challenged everybody, and challenged organizations, and challenged society, and challenged governments as to how we can actually move ourselves forward as we come out of this now. So it is important that we see the funding for our research and our core funding, which is what this is. It's the core funding, on top of which everywhere else you earn, to make sure. But we also have to do an agenda. We don't get enough out of the research councils as we should get either. So why aren't we doing enough to do that? We need to tackle
why aren't we
as well? Because it's not just the core funding, it's also the grant funding from research councils, which we need to get our fair share. Scotland, I'll give Scotland credit. They are very good at getting more than their fair share of that funding.
Well, they are fighters, aren't they? I mean, one of the things that as an outsider that I got against all these reviews is you see all these reviews coming in, and then you kind of know that they're going to go and sit on a table somewhere and nothing's going to happen at the end of it. Grenville Ham, would you comment on the QR funding, please, and particularly maybe the Reid report?
Yeah, it's one of those sort of things where I'll put my hand up and go, this is kind of beyond my expertise. Like I said, I'm just a dad doing his thing and hopefully playing my part.
But you're standing for election in the Senedd,
no,
so you're going to have to get your eggs in a row, ducks in a row.
No, fine. Okay. But I mean, we do have a manifesto commitment that we do want to use government funds, investment into the research elements of our universities, so they can become possibly the best funded in the UK. But again, a lot of the economic drivers behind that are beyond our gift, and we have to argue for that case, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. David Wilkins.
You stole my piece, Ellen. I was going to say, we have a review here which outlines what the failings are and what needs to be done about it. And as Welsh Lib Dems, we would implement the findings of the Reid review. We would act on that. And like you've said as well, we need to make sure that we're advocates for what's going on. Wales is incredible. We have an immense richness in researchers and innovators. Let's make sure that we get, or they get, the platform they deserve here in Wales initially, but UK-wide and ultimately internationally as well.
Okay, now there's a question here about Senedd Cymru, which of course has been a successful project. It's been a successful funding scheme supporting science research in Wales. Are you going to carry on? Is your party going to carry on with something similar to Senedd Cymru? Let me ask David Wilkins first then.
Yes, I would. If we've seen that something is successful, as you know, people here committed to the scientific approach, what works you keep. And if it doesn't work, you innovate, you try something new. But if we have something that's working, we evaluate it and we use it to move forward to promote what we're doing. Absolutely. Okay,
Grenville.
Yeah, no, we agree. Let's continue with things that work. Having the best available talent working in Wales is a benefit to all of us. So.
Okay, David Rees, I'm sure you would be saying the same.
I will be saying the same, but just remember, the second there were phases, and we only still done the initial phase of actually establishing the capacity. So that was an initial phase. So clearly, there's an intention to continue on from that point. It's not a sort of do it, that's it, it's done and dusted. It's about building that capacity and then using that capacity and enhancing it. So it's not over. It's not a project which is finished. It's an evolving project.
Okay, Tom. I don't believe you have answered this particular question.
No, there's nothing more to add really from what the other panelists have said. If there's a project that's working, we want to see it implemented and see it delivered.
Okay, I want to turn to the elephant in the room just briefly here, and that is diversity and inclusion. Because let's face it, I am the only woman on the Zoom currently. You are 4 gentlemen and white. And I happen to know that from the people who are actually on the Zoom listening to you all, that roughly 25% are women. So I would be grateful if you would each in turn talk about how you're going to address that, how you're going to get more women into STEM, how are you going to make sure that diversity and inclusion is dealt with. And please, would David Rees start, please?
This is something we've struggled with for the last 10 years since I've been chair of the STEM cross-party group. There's 2 agendas here. How can we use role models to encourage young people and women in particular to actually realise that STEM is a career path they can follow, and it isn't solely a path for boys who can build things. It's a wider path than that. So how can we use role models? And we have some excellent role models in the engineering world, in the science world, to be able to do that. But we also need to make sure that the new curriculum does take the science agenda and encourages people from all backgrounds and from all ethnicities to realise that actually it's fun. Science is a fun thing to do, and we can then get them involved in that fun thing. It's one of those topics, I think, we have sometimes left to go behind. When I was in school, biology was a very dry subject until you dropped biology, and then those who didn't drop enjoyed it because they got cutting things up. But it's about making the subject interesting, and that's what the new curriculum is about, focusing upon, making the subject interesting and meaningful to their lives, and give them opportunity and role models to do that. We are being too slow doing this. You said 25% on the score of women. Why isn't it 50%?
Well, why isn't it 50%?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, it should be. We need to do more to get them there.
Yeah, I mean, we all know, that's the point, isn't it, with questions like this? We all know what needs to be done. What I'm asking you is, what are you going to do about it? So, David Wilkins, what would you do?
You want to ask me, I can tell you what I'll do about it.
All right, then.
Raising it in the Senedd if it's like I'm re-elected, because, and I will give credit to, I think, Antoinette Sambach, who was a Conservative AM at the time. She was also promoting science for girls when she was a member. It's about making that message clear. It's about ensuring that we work with schools, we work with different organisations, the various organisations like you tonight.
Thank you,
I know
David.
they
You've
work with schools.
had your chance. Thank you very much. Could I ask the other David Wilkins? Sorry about that interruption.
I think I can answer the question, and it's a painful answer as to why we've only got 25% of our attendees are women. Is what are the other women doing? They're probably looking after children. They're probably making dinner. They're probably tidying up after a busy day at work. We are freer as males, particularly white males, we are freer to pursue other things. And we aren't going to get more women, we aren't going to get a greater diversity into STEM until we address the inequalities in our society. And until we empower women, we aren't going to see them in job roles because they are still being told by the media and by people in power that they are less valuable than their male counterparts.
So is your party going to do something about that? And
there is nobody who is more driven about ensuring all inequalities are removed than the Liberal Democrats. That is one of our core goals, and it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. The idea that my daughter is worth less than my son is abhorrent to me, and it worries me every time I brush her hair in the evening.
Thank you, David. Diolch yn fawr. Gren.
Yeah, in regards to us as candidates, I think there is still a problem within the political sphere. And I think one of the key things we need to do is actually go for the job sharing of these sort of roles, because it opens it up. This is not a gender thing. This is particularly people with disabilities. We need to have, one thing that we've learned in the last year is flexibility is key, okay? But then in regards to STEM, I think we need to have just a much wider collaborative effort. I think it starts with getting the best teachers in. We've got a commitment, increase their salaries, the starting salary by 10%. We know that decent, engaging teachers are highly valued, and they drag children into their subjects. And they will get those children to love those subjects, and they will go on to have a fulfilling life. And I think we all probably know as well that having a scientific mind provides you a really, really good, solid understanding of the way the world works. And again, it's promoting through people like yourself, Ellen, and through the mainstream media. We need to normalize science. We need to normalize the fact that it's everyday people of all types. So that, like I said, it needs to be this collective effort of all pushing it through.
So, diolch Gren. So, Tom Parker, what is the Conservative Party doing about this issue?
So I think there's a few issues that have been raised by others, and I think the situation is slightly more complex than a lot of people acknowledge as well, because we see in science-based professions, for example, doctors and dentists, particularly, they've got a massive increase over the last 10, 15, 20 years of women going into those. And I think it's what the science and technology sectors need to realise is actually that they're competing against those to get women into them, and to effectively to be able to, instead of, I suppose, from the traditional caring professions, which is perhaps a stereotype, that women have tended to go into them rather than, for example, engineering. I think what a lot of what David Rees was saying with regards to the mentorship, that's incredibly important, showing women that are actually in science, and actively encouraging young women with regards to with good teachers, like Gren has said. So I completely agree with all of that. I think it's really important, specifically, I think for all young people, really, so there needs to be a focus on education. And we actually just need more science teachers in Wales currently. There's a shortage of science teachers that are actually teaching. We've actually seen a net loss over the last few years of science teachers moving away from Wales. So we need to actually be encouraging them to be coming into Wales and to be able to actually help the next generation to reach their potential.
Diolch yn fawr, and you know, that there's one of the things we really do desperately need to be careful about, that we don't lose best talent, female and male, out of Wales at this time, because we really, really need them. One of the other things, of course, in Wales is that we have a language, an equality of language, and I'm very pleased to see a question wedi dod fewn yn yr iaith Gymraeg. Diolch I chi. Mae prosiectau ymchwil sy'n mynd i'r afael am materion o'r pandemig Covid i wrthiant gwrthfeicrobaidd. Right, I'm going to translate this because I've suddenly realised that you're not going to understand me. So the question here is about research projects that deal with the COVID pandemic, antibacterial, oh, you know what I mean, antibiotic resistance, antimicrobial resistance, and the climate change. All that research has been has suffered from the ODA reducing the funds from £245 million to £125 million. So, you know, those key, possibly the microbial resistance when it is likely to be our next pandemic, as well, I'm sure you'll all agree, is climate change. So how are we going to ensure that we have the correct funding for those key global issues? Let's start with Grenville Ham.
Yeah, well, so this goes back to my initial thing of we radically need to increase the amount of money we're spending into research, but equally the priorities need to be our environmental, social challenges. And the two that you've mentioned are two of the biggest elephants in the room. We know that antibacterial resistance is coming down the line. We know climate change is here. The effects are going to get worse. It's absolutely essential. So like I said from the very outset, and our whole ethos is that we need to be targeting specifically at these challenges that we're going to face, and because equally they're also going to be the cornerstone of our future economy as well. It is a double win there.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr. David Wilkins, please.
We need to make sure that our Welsh economy recovers so that we have the money that we need for this ongoing research. In order to make the world a better place, we have to look after it right now as well. So I think it's vitally important that we look at sensible economic development. We look at green recovery. We can talk about sovereign wealth funds from the huge amount of renewable energy. So the wind farms being built around our coasts are raising billions, which is heading for the Westminster Treasury. We need to make sure that that money comes here to Wales, where we can spend it on developing our future as well, in a sustainable way, of course.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. David Rees, please.
The issue is one of funding, and Ray's question was, how can we manage with a reduction of 50% of the funding from the UK government? I think this is the crucial element we talked about earlier about replacement of EU funding, replacement of other forms of funding. We have to start getting the message clear, particularly to Westminster, because that's where the funding for this particular funding came from, is that science and innovation is going to be the driver of the recovery of COVID. And if they don't put the funding into that approach, then what is going to happen to our research agenda, and we've been high in the world on research, is that the funding will go elsewhere, and companies will take it elsewhere. We need them to understand that if they want a world-class research agenda in the UK, then they have to fund it. That type of funding we talk about, if we keep on going that level, we are going to struggle to fund that type of gaps that are occurring. So it is an agenda we have to press. We cannot let it go. Antimicrobial has been around for quite a long time. We've been raising these issues for many things on the health agenda, let alone anything else. And we need to ensure that, because I've seen another question, that once COVID recovery occurs, we don't forget what made it recover. And that's the research and science and it was undertaken by our scientists to be able to deliver the vaccinations that people are benefiting from now. And that we realize that if you want to make sure that we are going to be in a strong position for a future pandemic, and let's be honest about it, we all think there's going to be a future one, then we need to keep that investment going.
Thank you, David Rees. Tom Parkhill, you know, as we say that antimicrobial resistance could well be the next pandemic. I know that not saying that climate change isn't, climate emergency isn't an emergency, but you know, how do you feel about funding things that could be the next pandemic on the horizon?
I think you're right. Antimicrobial resistance could have exactly the same sort of effect that this pandemic has had on economies and people's lives across the world. I think personally that the Joint Biosecurity Centre that's been set up by the UK government could play a critical role in spearheading this sort of major threat that the economy and also the country could face. So I personally think that would be a sensible response of being able to spearhead that. With regards to I suppose the response to the pandemic, there's one thing that's been really interesting is the way in which the UK government has actually kind of guaranteed some of the research that's been going on, particularly for the scale up of some of the vaccines. Now that to me seems like a really good model to actually take and use for as a funding model to be able to help de-risk some of the potentially I suppose riskier projects that might be undertaken with funding. And it's also should mean as well with that sort of project and the scale up that's involved, that there wouldn't be I suppose the delay that you might have seen over many years, because I know from working in industry and the scale up of complex biological products in particular, that can take many years. So I've been involved in projects that have taken 6-7 years from start to finish, and that's just off the scale up, not even the initial research of it. So we don't want to be having, I suppose, the initial research that can take a generation, and then after that the scale up also taking that length of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Time is of the essence with emergencies. I want to switch emphasis slightly for the moment to talk about digital. And we've had a couple of questions in advance about this with regard to how are we going to educate people in general about the importance of big data, of cybersecurity, and a question about what you're going to do to tackle the issue of digital poverty. Working with schools on science engagement through the pandemic, it's become clear that some students do not have equal access to all services, and school offering is so variable, not very equitable. So how are we going to sort that problem out digitally all over Wales? Because Gran, your broadband's not the best that it could be compared to the others, which, you know, doesn't disadvantage you, but could do. So who shall I have to ask that first? Let's ask Tom, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, with regards to rural broadband, you're absolutely right, and the UK government and the Welsh Conservatives are absolutely committed to upgrading rural broadband connections. With regards to, I suppose, the digital divide, which has been seen, I think there's a number of different issues with regards to our education system. With regards to digital. So first of all, the subject ICT, completely worthless. It's just completely outdated, still is completely unnecessary for the vast majority of young people. We need to get them into proper courses with regards to computing, which is going to give them a real grounding of the knowledge and of computers and programming, which is going to be really beneficial for young people in the future.
But we need to get the broadband sorted as well, not just the education
absolutely.
side.
But
Yeah?
I just want to make this one
Quickly
point with regards to that. And you often see that ICT courses are actually offered in the most deprived areas rather than computer courses, which are offered in areas where which are more affluent. And if we're able to scrap the ICT courses, then the only option is a computing course, and that is something that's going to be far more beneficial for more people, instead of this pretense that ICT courses are going to actually help.
So as an educator, thank you, Tom. David Wilkins, what are your feelings about that?
I'm curious about creating a question inside a question, but I wonder if Tom has actually seen the new curriculum that's come into law in Wales, because there is no ICT any longer. It's been folded into the science and technology area of learning and expertise. There is aspects of coding, there is online security, there is social media and healthy engagement with that. There is exactly what you have just called out has been put into place already. With the great work done by Kirsty Williams in this area, a fantastic Secretary for Education that we have. And What it's about is empowering our youngsters so that they can experience coding. I was absolutely devastated when one of my best physics students left my course at the end of year 12 because she wanted to go into computer science, and there just wasn't enough time for her to do maths, further maths and computer science alongside physics as well. And something someone said earlier, where there is competition between subjects, computer science is an incredible subject. You're absolutely right. And providing opportunities is exactly what this curriculum is about, providing opportunities for people to try things. And one other thought, which is schools have provided over the pandemic, they've handed out hundreds of laptops for students to use at home. They've handed out hundreds of dongles. And what I'm particularly proud again of Kirsty's work in the Senedd is she has given the schools and the regions and the councils the money, the funds, and the authority to do that. So that's what we need to solve these problems. It's bespoke, regional and local sorry, I've lost my words. I got quite passionate about Tom. He's wound me up a little bit. I do apologize.
Yeah, I can see that. Don't worry.
Yeah, so we're putting solutions in place at a local level that meet the local need. I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Grenville, could you elaborate on what Plaid Cymru is going to do about big data, cybersecurity and digital poverty?
Oh, so it's all of them, all of them. Okay, well, let's go back to the original thing. We have digital exclusion. You know, we know that very well here in the Brecon Beacons. I stood for election 5 years ago. It was the same argument. Everyone said, we're going to solve it within the next 5 years. We haven't. So we do desperately need to solve this. Particularly, we've seen that it's pushed a lot of people into particular isolation in rural areas throughout the pandemic. But if we go back to what we were talking about, digital poverty, particularly with children, I very much welcome all attempts to increase digital education. I think everybody's pretty knows that it's going to be fundamental to most careers going forward. But how do you solve poverty? The only real answer is you give them money. And that's why we've got this commitment for every household in poverty, or on benefits, is to begin with £10 a week per child, and then hopefully by the end of the Senedd term to £35 a week per term. You're not going to get people out of poverty unless they have money in their pocket.
Yeah, forgive me, I was talking about digital poverty, and as much as some people do not have the digital infrastructure or the bandwidth in order to be able to carry out work. Okay. I'm sure that was my fault. So I'm sure you'd agree that that is something that's high on the agenda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
No, my fault. David Rees.
Well, yeah. First of all, I want to highlight. I love the praising of the computer science. As a former lecturer in software engineering, I'm always keen to see people praise computer science, very much so. And I agree with David on the comments relating to the understanding of the curriculum. And I also put on record my recognition of the tremendous work Kirsty Williams has done in the Welsh Government. But let's remember, it was the Welsh Government, no matter which party we thought, it was the Welsh Government that funded all those schemes, but Kirsty clearly was the Education Minister and still is at this point in time. But in relation to the digital, last month, and it's only last month, so it's less than 31 days ago, we published as the Welsh Government a new digital strategy, and the Welsh Government is committed by its manifesto to continue with that strategy. And let me put a couple of points on there. Digital services to be modernised throughout. Digital inclusion to equip people with motivation, access and skills. Digital skills, create a workforce that has the digital skills. Digital economy to drive economic prosperity by embracing and exploiting digital innovation. Digital connectivity, which is one of the past comments you're talking about, infrastructure, supported by fast and reliable infrastructure. And on that point, I remind people that the Welsh Government put £200 million in because the UK government failed to do so to get actually great infrastructure here. And data and collaboration by making sure that services are improved by working together with data and knowledge. So that's part of the strategy that was only published last month, and the Welsh Government, as part of the manifesto commitment, is actually to take that forward. So the Welsh Labour Party is actually saying, we have a strategy, we published it, our manifesto commitment is to take it forward.
Lovely. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, I hope that's helped to answer the people who had all the digital questions. An interesting question here, which, because we've been talking about research, could we be a little bit more specific about the type of research that we are talking about? Because many of you have emphasised science for job creation and economy. Do you consider that is the main role of science, is to serve the economy and to create jobs? Or do you think that the science in terms of curiosity, because let's face it, curiosity might bring the next big thing. So where is your emphasis, do you think, on how we progress to the future with research in science? I'm going to ask David Rees, please, first.
Well, research is, yeah, you could talk about the blue sky thinking and that type of approach to research, or the applied research. Both are very important aspects of research. You can't apply something until you've actually got some of the theory and other aspects discovered. And I'm very proud of Specific, which is in my constituency, as a perfect example of how science looked as a research, how we could actually place, in this case, photovoltaic cells on top of coatings for steel, and then use those in buildings. And then you apply that to a part innovative approaches, and we are now looking at building properties with that to be able to house people and therefore cut costs of electricity and energy for those homes. So your blue sky thinking, your pure research has to take place, because they do come up with those innovative concepts.
Okay.
But then how you build upon that as well. So there's two strands to that. We can't ignore either strand.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
To an extent, I agree with David. You can't ignore either strand, because obviously pure research is incredibly important with regards to, I suppose, obviously curiosity and thinking for the future as well. But at the minute, Wales is really lagging behind with regards to the economy. So it would be remiss of me not to concentrate more, and the Welsh Conservatives are committing to creating 65,000 extra jobs, and science and technology is an absolutely critical way of doing that, whether it's with hydrogen, within the semiconductor cluster, within the life sciences industry, with engineering. These are all areas where her Welsh industry can lead.
Okay,
and I think that's absolutely critical in helping the prosperity of Wales.
Okay, thank Graham. Sorry, I'm calling you all by your first names now. I feel I know you so well. Apologies.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Whether we're just exploring just to answer simple questions. My personal belief is that it's to solve problems. So that's not necessarily the economy. It's extending it further, whether that's from the natural world, the human experience, or even well beyond our planet these days. So I think on a personal level, I think it's about the solving of the challenges that we face.
Lovely, thank you. And the physics teacher, David Wilkins, what's your view on this?
There has to be balance, but unfortunately, as everybody, we have to go back to the conversation about funding slightly here. And if we're in a market for funding, if the number of grants for funding is not able to be met by the amount of funds available, unfortunately, people are going to find the prioritizing of one thing over another. The person handing out the grants at the research department at the universities will have a say ultimately in what gets decided. So I think it's very important to ring fence some blue sky thinking. I mean, when they discovered the electron, there was no foreseeable use for it. And magnets and motors were very similar. And now, obviously, we live in a world where they are fundamental to the way we go about things. So to echo several of the statements, yes, we need to do the blue sky, but we perhaps need to protect it if we're going into a time of shortage.
Brilliant, thank you. Coming back to funding for a minute, because it obviously is fundamental to all of it. There's an interesting comment here as well about women and the jobs. As a student coming to the end of a PhD, the trouble I see in university research is that women leave because the jobs are unstable and short-term, poorly paid, and entirely reliant on getting funding for PhDs and the first and second postdocs in the first place. That is, the early career is extremely tough. So you are going to lose people because of that. So I'd like to go back to that, please, and a very brief one-liner from all of you about what solution have you got for that? And I'm going to start with David Wilkins, please.
We need to look at how we can provide research institutions with long-term funding, and it might not be huge, but at least then they know what they have and they can put it out in a way that fits their business model as institutions, so that they can then staff those research facilities as they need to.
Thank you. David Rees.
postdocs have always been a problem in the sense that it's always been based upon grants. I've recently had issues when we've been addressing the issues in Swansea University regarding staffing levels and the budgets of the universities. I think what we need to do is to ensure that universities have sufficient funding so that they are not reliant upon grants, which they either win or lose, and in the shortage on funding of grants, which means that postdocs have less reliability. We need to build up a research capability which allows universities and other institutions, other research institutions beyond that, to keep people in post irrespective of a grant coming in. And that's, I think, the biggest problem we got. Too many are relying upon a grant, and it's usually 2 or 3 year grants. And as you say, and it's not just women, any person coming into that position will be looking at what is the long-term future I have here compared to perhaps an institution elsewhere.
Thank you. Tom Parker.
Yeah, I think it's sensible to have a long-term funding settlement for universities. I think that the difficulty that you've got to acknowledge with regards to the sort of work that's being undertaken by PhDs and this is the fact that it's actually often very blue skies, and that you can't guarantee a success after 3, 4, 5 years. So if you're going to be trying to fund, and so there's got to be effectively a cut-off at some point. Because if you're going to fund a research project for 10 years, when after 2 or 3 years, it's pretty clear that it's actually not really going anywhere, or it hasn't had the outcome that's expected, then there's got to be a point where you are able to cut that and to stop that. So there is a reason why these grants have been taken up in the place. But I do take the point that actually from the young researcher who mentioned, and I can fully understand why young women coming into like research in that area, particularly because they're going to have that lack of stability, exactly when the likelihood is that they're going to be wanting to set up a family. So it isn't an ideal situation in any world, but it's a very difficult one to actually address.
Thank you, Grant. Okay, I'm going to move to something that has been mentioned several times, and that is the climate emergency. Because let's face it, decarbonisation is an important issue. Wales's carbon emissions are some of the highest in the UK per capita. And there are huge research and innovation challenges in order to decarbonise industry and society equitably, and also allow the growth of new high value jobs. What plans do you have to support industrial and domestic transition from carbon intensive businesses to net zero, whilst growing regional economic activity and prosperity for all? I find that quite a difficult question to ask, leave alone to answer, but I'm going to ask Grenville Ham, please, first. But,
okay.
I knew you'd be eager
do I have an hour to answer this one?
I'm going to cut you short.
The fundamental thing is we need to have a framework in place. So we're going to be launching what's called, if elected, of course, Ani Cymru, which is essentially it's a development agency for renewable energy projects, as well as another one called Prosperity Wales, which is there for the infrastructure. So as someone that's built around about 80 projects across Wales, I know there's huge areas where most of the resources are. You cannot build them because there's no good infrastructure. And it's been like that for about 8 years. So one of the primary things is we need to have an infrastructure that will allow not just the big scale stuff, but also the decentralized small scale, whether that's just farmers, community groups, even they can be owned by civic institutions. But then also we want to have 6 strategic areas located around Wales in which they will be our sort of eco hubs, developing small scale localized businesses, particularly focusing on what we think the emerging technologies will be hydrogen and marine energy, which again will link with the educational institutions. But the biggest problem that we've got, all of the financial instruments for delivering green tech are retained by Westminster. We have very little that we can do. We can squeeze a little bit through innovations on the margins. So what I would be hopeful is Wales really starts getting much more vocal on the regulators, things like Ofgem, which basically control the purse strings for investment. And then we also want to make sure that when we have the large scale stuff that comes in, let's focus it on decarbonising our large industries like the steel industry. Let's drive down those carbon emissions. And again, that's technology that we can export and then become a beacon for it. But it's one of those things we can be quite glib and say, we've already identified 80 terawatt hours of energy. Our total energy demand is around about 88 across Wales. Okay, so it's easy for us to do that for all energy, but we don't have the levers nor the infrastructure to deliver it. So what we really need to do is spend the next 5 years in setting it in place, all of those frameworks in order to allow it to flourish.
Diolch, Gran. David Rees, with your beautiful Port Talbot background there.
Yeah, you've got it in the background behind me shows one of the major issues we have to do to decarbonise our industries. And with the steelworks behind me, and the steelworks have been a crucial element of manufacturing here in Port Talbot, then clearly we need to look how can we help companies decarbonise. And this is, I would agree with Glenn in one sense, there's a lot of levers that Westminster have here that we need to actually get to be able to do things. The West Labour Party has actually got a commitment in its manifesto for renewable energy. It's targeting 1 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. It's an approach that is the place. We declared a climate emergency. Let's be honest about this. We're the first UK government to declare a climate emergency. So we understand the needs. We have targets of making sure we're net zero by 2050. The figures are there, the plans are there, the projections are there. But there is an element of UK government responsibility to also be involved in this. And we can go so far, but if I want to decarbonise that works behind me, then we're talking about not tens of millions of investment, we're talking about billions of investment into the sectors. And we need UK government to also step up the mark to ensure that as we decarbonise, because we can't just shut these businesses down, because the economy is going to be driven backwards. So we need to look at helping them decarbonise, working with them to decarbonise, so that we can then have a sustainable industry and a decarbonised an agenda meeting the climate emergency.
Diolch yn fawr. Tom.
Well, first of all, the Welsh Conservatives are committed to getting to net zero by 2040. So that's our commitment for that. And what we will plan to do with regards to that commitment is specifically on a few different projects. Gren talked about marine energy. So we want to set up a £150 million fund for small green energy projects, particularly with marine energy. The UK government has already committed to setting up to funding hydrogen-based fuel production facilities up in Anglesey. We need to be looking further and investing more into carbon capture and storage, which is one of those technologies which has always seems to have been on the cusp of actual rollout, but hasn't quite made it there. So the UK government is committed to doing that. And I suppose with regards to, I suppose for people at home, we're also looking at a £50 million investment into completing a fast charging network so that more people and public services can be able to have those electric cars. And it's worth remembering that it is roughly 15, 16, 17% now that transport is the with regards to the number of the amount of carbon that's coming out of
major contributor.
That's the word I was trying to say.
All right, I can hear your baby in the background. It's all right.
No worries.
Thank you. David Wilkins, what are your views on this? I know you take the bike to work every day because I read that about you.
I'm infamous as the active transport guy. We need to promote that. I think David's absolutely right that decarbonising a steelworks is going to cost billions and take years. But what we can do is go after some of the softer wins, some of the lower hanging fruit. What disgusts me is to travel along the North Wales coast by train. There are only 2 spaces for a bicycle on each train. So you cannot, unless you take a car, move from one end of the North Wales coast to the other with your bicycle. So you cannot commute to work by bicycle for more than your legs can carry you. I'm very fortunate. I can cope with 20 miles a day. I'm forced usually to only endure 5 in the wind and rain of Wales. So let's go after some of these smaller easier targets. And let's get active transport on the agenda. I'm a huge fan of our policy towards the 20-minute neighborhood. Let's have the services that people need close to their homes, so they don't have to jump in cars, so they don't have to make air flights to get from Holyhead to Cardiff. You know, this shouldn't be that difficult. We can get some of these carbon emissions under control quickly and easily. We are blessed with renewable energy resources in Wales. Nobody's mentioned tidal barriers, which are a shambolic failure in Swansea Bay.
Sorry to cut across, somebody has asked the question about whether or not you would all be supporting that. I suspect
I think that there is, yes, I think that we have, you know, there is a market for this technology, whether it's barrages or we harness tidal through other tidal turbine systems along the North Wales coast, Anglesey, the Cardigan Bay. We have such fantastic energy-rich waters. We could become world leaders in this technology. We could export that. We're back on that blue sky versus economic research now, but we can export that to the world whilst enriching our own backyard.
Thank you. Okay, so here's another question. I've only got a couple left because I don't want to take people beyond 6:30, so please be as concise as you can. You know, the pandemic has highlighted the fact that Wales does not have, possibly discuss, a big enough critical mass to be self-sufficient in science. You know, we did lots of stuff in Wales with PPE and the testing and the ventilators and all sorts of things like that, but we cannot be AstraZeneca, right? So we can't do it all. How do you feel about this, as briefly as you can? How can Wales maximise, and can it be self-sufficient in terms of science? I know that David Wilkins is going to say collaboration is the key, so I'm going to ask you to go first.
Collaboration is the key.
Got it.
Didn't want
Thank
to
you.
disappoint.
Next.
We're part of a world. We can't solve climate change on our own. Wales cannot absorb enough carbon to sort out what's going on. We have to be part of a global solution, and it starts by close work with our nearest neighbour, which is England, growing through the rest of the UK and out into Europe and the rest of the world.
Thank you. Diolch Gran.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with any of that. Even though, you know, I'm probably anomalous insofar as I want Wales to be an independent nation, I also want it to be outward-looking, collaborative, and working with everybody across the world. You know, my view of independence is not isolationism at all. It is always about collaborative and looking out. Ellen, I got a problem with two of my kids. I've had to dash out twice.
No, I'm so sorry. You go. Don't worry.
I'm really sorry to all the other candidates and those watching, but I'm going to have to go.
Please don't worry. Priorities, and you're a dad. So thank you very much for joining us, Gran. There's only 2 questions left, and I probably know what your answers are, so don't worry. Okay. Cheers. Thank you. What I would like to ask you all then is, we don't have a dedicated Minister for Science Research and innovation. Should we have a champion, somebody who is there? I think the UK government does, can't remember the person's name, but should we have a dedicated Minister for Science? Because currently it's under Kirsty Williams' brief, I believe. David Rees.
I'm not sure if it's under Kirsty Williams, it's actually under Ken Skates. We used to have a Deputy Minister for Science and Skills.
But we certainly don't have one now.
No, and I'm going to separate us from Westminster, because if you look at Westminster, how many ministers are there in Westminster? About, in a package, is about 150 to 200 basically, cost a lot. So we just haven't got the numbers in the Senedd to actually have that number of ministers, or proportionally wise. Should there be someone with regard to science? The answer, I believe, is in the economy agenda, there needs to be someone identified with the message of science and driving innovation forward. Yes, I do believe there should be. How they work that out, whether it's, I don't think it should be Kirsty, by the way, or an education minister. No, it shouldn't be just purely academic. It's beyond that.
Yeah, it should be somebody dedicated to the subject, and we've realised that it is the bedrock of our progress in terms of science. So Tom, what do you reckon? Should we have a minister in the Senedd solely responsible for research, development and innovation and science, basically?
I don't think solely responsible.
Why not?
Because I like David has just said, I don't think there's the critical mass of people that within the Senedd that you're going to be able to have within a government that's there's not that many Senedd members effectively to be able to do that. But I do think it should be a critical priority. And for the references, Amanda Soloway is the UK.
Thank you. Apologies. David Wilkins.
I think it's a terrible idea, actually. I think what we need is it to be a core brief of the Senedd, with everybody contributing to it, because what looks like innovation and research and all that depends on where you are. And the last thing we want is research and innovation in Wales to be driven along a political agenda. Can you imagine if a party you did not like, and we all have different flavours on that here, was in charge of the research budget or in the way that we were going to pipeline money towards different sectors of research or innovation? I think it's a terrible idea to politicise research and innovation. I think it should be a core brief of everyone and one of the Senedd's key ideas in driving us forward as a progressive nation.
Just to come back on that, David, so does that mean you think you wouldn't agree with having a science minister in the UK government because you think it's a politicised role?
It wouldn't be my first choice of ministerial role, no, Tom.
Can I also come back? Because let's be blunt about this. When the members of the government are politicians, and if you're driving an agenda forward, there has to be someone to drive that agenda forward. And that will be a politician by nature, because that's who's members that make the government. So you're not politicising the theme, but you're making sure there's an individual who has responsibility. That's not the same thing.
Yes. Does anybody want to come back again?
Well, yeah, I think the idea does have some merits, because you see with regards to the vaccine rollout, having a dedicated person who's actually going to be responsible and effectively sole responsibility of an agenda such as this, then I think it is helpful. I think David Rees hit the nail on the head, really. I don't think there's currently the capacity in the Senedd to be able to do that.
Can I just stop you there, Tom, because one of the audience has wanted to come back on your comments, saying don't have the numbers to have a science minister. Good grief, is what the audience is saying.
No, that's okay. Maybe I haven't explained myself well enough. I think there should be someone whose responsibility it is, like it is currently, but I don't think it should be a sole job within there, because what David Wilkins, it's so confusing with so many Davids, sorry guys.
Changing names.
David Wilkins got right, I think, with his comments was that I've distracted myself. I can't remember what you did get right. Come back to me.
Okay.
I assume it was all of it, Tom. It's fine.
David Lewis was raised this question.
We're not supposed to mention names,
we
but
only
that's
have
all
so
right.
many members of the Senedd as ministers. You can't make a lot of them. You can only have so many. There's a limit to how many you can have, and that's ministers and deputy ministers. So in a sense, when you say you don't have the numbers, you're asking the question, can we actually have more? Under the law, we can't. I think there's 14 you're allowed to have under the Government of Wales Act.
Yeah, but you know, maybe the real issue is not necessarily the numbers of people, but the numbers of issues involved, because, you know, you are talking about pandemics, you're talking about microbial resistance, you're talking about climate change, climate emergency, all those issues, and the fact that we've already said that research is the bedrock of future jobs in the economy and digitalization. It is such a massive subject. Does it really, hand on heart, have the attention that it deserves with all of you? Bringing me to my last question, because, okay, if we're not going to have one champion, let's say that we don't have one of those, could we possibly have all of you, as David Rees suggested, as a champion? In fact, the Royal Society of Chemistry, in their manifesto ahead of the election, said that they were wanting to call on candidates, you guys, to commit to being science champions in the Senedd. So my last question to you is, if we can't have one person in charge, how are you going to address all these issues that we talked about? And there's many, and I do apologise that I haven't covered. So please give me your final presentation of how you would be a science champion, seeing as though you've been chosen by your parties this evening to talk about science within your party. David Wilkins, what would you do as a science champion within the Senedd?
Well, I am a science champion. I stand in front of 30 students 5 times a day and extol the virtues of physics, sometimes the most dull, dry physics, and sometimes the most exciting aspect of biomolecular engineering.
Is that what you'd do in the Senedd then?
Absolutely. I'd bore anyone to death about any of the subjects that you want. But it's bigger than that. It's engaging with not only members of the Senedd or our parties, but engaging with the public as well. It's about taking the idea that science is for nerds and throwing it away and saying, actually, science is for you. And it's going to have to be a big part of our lives. It should be, but people are conveniently able to forget about the computer engineering in their mobile phone. They don't look at it anymore. It just does the things. We have to reignite that conversation. We have to be champions. We have to be passionate about our subjects at all times in everything that we do. And that's why I didn't want a minister, because actually we should all be a minister for science and innovation.
David Wilkins, diolch yn fawr iawn, thank you very much. Tom, what's your final resume pretending or putting yourself out there as a champion of science?
I resent that. No, I'm definitely not pretending to be.
That was a Freudian slip. I apologize.
Yes, definitely. I agree with a lot with what David said. Again, I think, to be honest, across the whole panel, there's been a lot of agreement across the night with regards to science. We need to be encouraging young people, and David obviously does a great job with that with his as a physics teacher. But we need to make sure that more people see it as a route into employment, into I suppose just interest, and making it more interesting and seeing how fundamental it is for how we live our lives, how we live are going to live in the future. And just looking at the pandemic as well, you see how much of a difference you can make, how much you can give to society by taking up a science degree. Like it's or science degree or apprenticeship or getting into science. It is absolutely fundamental to the way we live our lives at the minute.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Tom. David Rees.
Well, both David and Tom have highlighted the passion for science, and there's no question about that. But what they've got to remember is, as an elected member, you have to then channel that passion as to how can I actually use that within the Senedd to promote science and to hold the government to account as to how it delivers on science and innovation. And that's the question you're asking. How can we champion those things as a member of the Senedd? And there are probably many on this call who know, because I've been chairing of the STEM group for the past 10 years, I am very passionate and I want to do exactly that. And it's getting the government to come to those sessions, to come to the table, to understand what we mean and what we want. So being the champion in the Senedd is about holding that government to account to deliver on its promises and beyond its promises, because there will be things we will come to where we think, you need to do this as well. You know, not just what you said in your manifesto, but you need to do this as well. And that's the job of the politician in us, not the job of the scientist in us. The job of the politician is to drive that agenda forward from the back benches or from the opposition benches to ensure that the message is clear in the government's mind and they hear us. Okay, well, I'd like to thank David Rees, Tom Parkhill, Grendel Ham as well, and David Wilkins. All the best to you all. Thanks to the Learned Society of Wales, Royal Society of Chemistry, Royal Society of Biology and the Institute of Physics. A diolch I chi gyd am gymryd rhan. Hopefully, we will move forward with optimism that science, research, development and innovation will be high on the agenda of all parties moving forward with that passion that they have all, to be fair, talked about. Let's see if they can actually put it into practice and inspire the other people in the Senedd that they work with. Yeah, my Cymru yn heiddi y gorau. Wales deserves the best chance. So make it happen, guys. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. Hwyl fawr bawb, and thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've benefited from that. A diolch am eich cwestiynau. Nos da I chi gyd.